am Carmen DeVito, garden designer in New York City, and on today's video, we're going to do a couple of things. We are going to go out into my garden to go over some very last end of the season chores and talk about what to cut, what not to cut, and about how to protect your garden plants over the winter. And we're going to make a winter garden in this beautiful steel container that I'm going to put in my front garden. So follow me. Let's go. So here I am in my rear perennial garden, and there's a lot of controversy about whether or not to cut the garden down and or to leave leaves and garden debris in the garden. One school of thought is clean everything up. It'll help prevent pests and diseases in the garden in the future. Another school of thought is that you want to leave things up, especially things with seed heads, so that we have food for the birds in the winter. I take a kind of middle ground approach. Some things that look really bad, like these anemones here, this anemone japonica, when they start getting black and crispy, I cut them down and clean them up before the end of the season. But things like this, Rudbeckia, the birds love to eat the seeds here. So I'll leave these up. I'll leave these other perennials up so that the birds and other critters can get some seeds. I also like to leave the seeds on and not clean up too soon, because if there's plants that I really love, such as this gomphrena, and I want to save the seed for it, and I have a very special project plan for this, I'm going to leave it up until it really gets dry and fully mature so that I can collect the seeds properly. Now let's talk about leaf litter and mulch. In my front garden, I have a lot of leaves from my tree and my neighbor's trees, and that garden, because it's so densely planted, I leave most of the leaves on the surface of the soil, and it acts like a mulch. So I don't use mulch, and that garden I don't tend to replant seasonally. I don't add a lot of things to it. It's kind of a mature garden, so I leave the leaves. Eventually they break down, most of them break down over the winter with the snow on them and the cold, and they basically turn into soil. They turn into compost. Then in the spring, what I do is I clean up just what's a little bit left, and kind of uncovering the bulbs and the things that are early. Now in this garden, which I'm constantly fussing with and moving things around and adding and subtracting and editing, I like to put down a mulch because I have a lot of early blooming things and I don't want weeds to pop up. So I'm going to show you the kinds of mulch that I use. There's two kinds. And I only like natural colored mulch. Nothing that is dyed brown or black or red. This one here is a shredded hardwood mulch, but it almost looks like soil. This is called Hampton's Estate Mulch. And it eventually lightens in color, breaks down, and kind of turns into compost too, but it takes longer. Now this is called Sweet Peat. And do you see this? This is a mulch, but it almost looks like soil. So I like to use this in the vegetable garden because it doesn't look mulched, and it starts feeding pretty quickly because it's more broken down and it has some manure in it. It'll feed the vegetables and the herbs really, really well. So it has a little bit of a funky odor, but it eventually goes away. So does this one. The first day it might smell a little weird, but then it breaks down and goes away. So don't use colored mulches. They look unnatural. They add chemicals to the soil that you don't need. So now let's make a winter container. Just because it's gotten cold doesn't mean that you have to stop planting. And here in the Northeast in Zone 7, winter is really long. We have 3 or 4 months where it's pretty cold and nothing is blooming. So we want to have some color, and the best way to do it is with different textures of evergreens. I have in the front of my garden a low wall that I notice people keep on tripping over. So I decided that I'm going to put a planter on it. So I got this big window box. This one's made out of steel, and it's a specific kind of steel called Core 10 steel. And this planter comes from this company called Veridec Outdoor. So it's a steel that eventually gets rusted, but then it stops rusting. The rust actually acts like a kind of coating on it, and it turns this beautiful kind of orangey color, but doesn't impact the integrity of the material. It rusts, but then it just stays solid. So because it's steel, it's rather thin. So here's what I've done to protect and insulate the plants, because it's also kind of shallow and not that deep. Here, there's styrofoam, and this actually came with the planter. And if you have a thin or narrow planter, it's a good idea to add this like 1/2 inch of styrofoam or even more to help insulate, because what kills the plants in the winter is not the cold, but the fluctuating temperatures. So we have put styrofoam on the sides, and we have put drainage holes on the bottom, and also here, the landscape fabric for drainage. And then this is all going to be filled with soil, and I'm going to lay it out. In the next section, you're going to see how I do it. But now I'm going to introduce you to the plants that I'm going to use for winter. This is a miniature carex, and it's lovely in the winter, and it stays kind of evergreen if it's not too brutal, and it gives us brightness. So I purchased it for its texture and its bright color. Here we have osmanthus, and I bought it for its also texture and also its green and white foliage. It looks like a holly, but it's not. And here we have euphorbia, which I love. It blooms in the late spring, but it has beautiful texture and winter color. I got a solid colored one for its red tones, and also this green and yellow one. And another great plant to use for winter color is heather. Heather blooms in the winter and fall, and sometimes in the early spring, whenever it's cool. And it has these sweet little flowers and a nice kind of almost evergreen texture. That's a really good choice. And of course, these are super hardy. This is Juniper Blue Pacific. It's a trailing kind, so I got this to do the front of the planter to come down. And here is a little holly. This is also an osmanthus, a false holly, and again, beautiful little multicolored leaves. And this is one of my favorites. This is a cypress, blue ice, and it has really cool bright yellow kind of, I know, cones that look like little light bulbs on it, and that's gonna look beautiful in this planter. And finally, this is also one of my all-time favorite winter plants. This is called Lacothaway, and it's an evergreen, but it's not a conifer, so it's got a shiny leaf, and the new growth is beautiful orangey color, and then in the winter it turns this like burgundy color. So I'm gonna mix these all up, and then I'm gonna show you how it looks all planted together. So here is the planter complete. I used almost all of the plants. I like an asymmetrical style, even in a rectangular box. So I'm going to water it, and I'm going to put it in place. And if you like, when you're making window boxes for winter, you can add little touches like natural pine cones, cut greens if you have any holes in the planter that you kind of want to fill, so it can look more festive for the holidays. Thank you for watching my video. On the next episode, we are going to go inside and talk about indoor plants for the holidays, cyclamen, paper whites, poinsettias, and I'm going to share with you how to grow them, how to take care of them, and get the most out of them for the holiday. Thank you so much for watching my video. Check back this winter. I'm going to have a brand new website where I'm going to have garden coaching sessions where you can sign up and have some personal one-on-one gardening lessons. Stay well, and see you in the garden.